Greetings, y'all. This time I'm going to rant at the left a little bit. Normally, lately, especially since we've gone so far against the right-hand wall that the Overton window can't move anymore, I've mostly been going after them. But I see leftists, particularly democratic socialists, who bandy the term capitalism the same way that the right bandies the term communism. Folks, we're smarter than this. Capitalism is a broad range of things, just like socialism is. For instance, so-called democratic socialism, often called Nordic capitalism, is a socialist and capitalist system that at its root is capitalistic in that, on most things, the market determines the prices of the exchange of goods and services based on a variety of factors, but the biggest one being what the market will bear. However, it also recognizes that certain things such as health care, quite likely housing, and maybe even such things as a basic income, do not respond well to the capitalist model and therefore should be outside of its sphere and funded by taxation. They are valued differently than how the open market would do it. This is a blended hybrid system. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir, to the vast majority of you who will listen to me, and that's not the point. The point is being illustrated by that. Because on the right, if you say you're a democratic socialist, some idiot, usually the first one in your comments, is going to come back with, "You're a communist!" And yeah, I said it with that complete mispronunciation of communism on purpose, because these people either can't or won't speak. They make a lot of noise, but they don't speak. Anyway, quibble aside, capitalism as proposed by Adam Smith and communism as put forth by Karl Marx are very broad and present ideals. I would challenge any of you on the left who have not done this, and frankly a lot more people on the left that have done it than on the right, but nevertheless I would challenge you to read An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and I'm going to use the German words because it sounds cool, Das Kapital by Karl Marx. The English translation of it was approved by Friedrich Engels and is fairly accurate according to everything I've been able to find out. But compare them side by side. You will find more agreement than difference. Don't take my word for it. I mean, I would like you to for the course of this video. But overall, don't take my word for it because I'm just a guy saying it. Check my sources. Capitalism at root is that those who have property, whether real property or money or other things that can be traded, are able to determine the prices by a system of supply and demand. More supply tends to equal out to demand and cause prices to lower, etc. This is the basics. And this is still true under a socialist system. Not necessarily under a communist system, at least not the Marxist-Leninist version, because then you have everything centrally controlled and they don't have a good way of pricing it. This was the argument that was made by my brain went blank. Ludwig von Mises, for instance, and a number of others, Hayek, Menger. The Austrian School of Economics makes this argument quite cogently. And time has borne this out. A centrally controlled economy does not work. And that is not socialism, that is a centrally controlled economy. They conflate the two. It's also not capitalism, it is a centrally controlled economy, which we basically have now. It's a corporate oligarchy. It is capitalist at its roots, but it is a perversion of Adam Smith's capitalism because capital has all of the controls and they use them to manipulate the market. calling the American version of capitalism the default, even though it's the largest and the most conventionally successful, does not mean it's the default. It is instead an extreme. I have long said, and I grew up in the era where both countries were still powerful, that the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were mirror images of each other. They took the opposite tack on how they controlled things, but how they actually worked was very similar. Because of the multiplier effect that is done in open markets, the USA was able to compete slightly better and use that leverage to crush the burgeoning socialist movement. Now, had the Leninist style of socialism been as powerful as the American corporatist system, then they probably would not have been crushed. But nevertheless, they had a wide array of things against them. So we don't know if their system could have worked in a fair experiment. We do know that the way it went down was not good. And here we are 35 years in America looking at the same things with a somewhat different mechanism. Calling this capitalism, even using the term end-stage capitalism, is sometimes consciously and usually unconsciously deceptive, just like when they cry communist. We should use some different term. I prefer a capitalist oligarchy because that's what this is. Oligarchies are not necessarily capitalist. The fact of the matter is the Soviet Union was an oligarchy. An oligarchy is ruled by groups. In the case of the Soviet Union and the United States, those groups were operated by the rich, so you could call it a plutocracy. The Soviet Union's internal contradictions didn't allow these rich people to claim that they were rich, which caused them grief and gave them certain problems. On the other hand, the corporate oligarchy in the United States, while it openly embraces plutocracy, has its own internal contradictions in that their model doesn't work for the vast majority of people. It did enough to shellac things and put a nice shine on them for a little while, starting in 1981 when the voodoo economics were introduced and put in place. But not for very long. I'm going to break with a great many people on the right and the left with this and say that the trickle-down economics worked and worked well for a short period of time. Before you get out the pitchforks, picture a Band-Aid. It works for a short period of time. It protects the wound. It allows things to heal. Our trade was way out of balance. Foreign competitors were trouncing us in the late 70s because they were competing better. Again, the system is not pure. Pure systems only exist on paper. So introducing some brakes to American industry actually did help. Things improved. I lived through this. Things did improve for about 3 years. Then they started to decline. But they had improved quite a bit. So the decline took longer for us to notice. Excuse me. But by 1983, 84 at the latest, this Band-Aid no longer worked. What needed to happen, but did not, was to restore the tax rates at the upper margins so that we could again start funding social programs at the way they needed to be and achieve a balance. After 12 years of trickle-down economics, we got Bill Clinton as president and a largely democratically controlled Congress for a little bit. And things did improve, but they continued to preach the gospel of this particular and peculiar form of capitalism that had never really been tried before and didn't work as intended. The whole neoliberal thing was basically saying, yeah, we like the trickle-down economics, but we do need to shore up some things. And let's face it, on the economic side, the Democrats did well. On a lot of other things, they did not. But the biggest disservice they did was embracing this idea that we can make this extreme version of capitalism work with just a few tweaks. When it obviously, especially now, but it was obvious even then, was falling apart at the foundation because the foundation was a band-aid on what had become a sucking chest wound. Is globalization good? I would say yes, but carefully. This is where, well, the Canadians recently did their thing and ran Reagan's speech and really pissed off the Orange Glob. I found that hilarious. But immediately you have people on the right, well, Reagan used tariffs too. Yes, he did, judiciously and carefully, and sometimes recklessly, but not that often. People like to compare, Reagan to modern conservatives, and it don't work. One, he wasn't really the one pulling the strings. He was a very good actor. But even putting that aside, what he was that the modern conservative in their complete knee-jerk ideology totally misses was intelligent. Yeah, looking back on it, hell, even at the time, and I was a kid, at the time I disagreed with probably half of what he said. Now, as an adult, probably more like 90%. But he was a leader. Not a dictator, a leader. We don't really have any of those right now. We've got a couple, but they're not currently in enough power to matter. No, I'm not going to name names right now. That'll be for a later time. But what we have seen over and over again is that the neoliberal embrace of corporate capitalism has not worked. Yes, their tweaks have helped the corporate economy and the government economy to some extent, but not the lower end. Things continue to get worse. Prices continue to rise while wages remain stagnant or drop. And to you boomers out there that might be watching me since I look old, learn how inflation works, because what none of you want to acknowledge, or, well, none is a hard word, but the ones making the most noise of the generation previous to mine seem to not understand something. Minimum wage peaked the year I was born, 1968. There has not been a year since then where purchasing power at minimum wage came even close. The minimum wage now is a joke. When I went out into the world in the late 80s, a single man could live on minimum wage if you lived cheap. And by live, I mean have an apartment, not necessarily a decent one, but an apartment. Have enough food, have your utilities paid. Healthcare hadn't got completely out of hand at that point, so if you had an emergency, you were okay. Ongoing health problems, now you were fucked. But I was a young man. I did not understand that. Now, in my 6th decade, the old bod is letting me know about the things the young bod did. So even on that one, we were failing. But nevertheless, you could make a living as a single person to the extent where you could actually have a little fun. I went to quite a few concerts, and concerts were never cheap. They weren't as expensive as they are now, but they were never cheap. Or when I hit 21, I could hit the bars once a week, maybe. I've never drank like a fish because I can't. I'm the easiest drunk in the world. But even given all of that, you could do it. It was a step onto the ladder of at least minor success. You could live your life. Now contrast that, and we're talking about like 1986 to about 1991 here is the period I'm talking about, where I actually did this for the most part. By the early 90s, I was making more than minimum wage, but not a lot. I worked in the restaurant industry for the most part. It doesn't pay well. It should, but it doesn't. But what we saw in that time was that a single person could live on minimum wage. Now, conservatives particularly love to talk about the traditional family, and I think quite a few on the left would like the idea of having a single income family, or making it so that you have the equivalent of it so that you have more family time, like perhaps the couple, one works 20 hours and the other works 20 hours, alternating, so that you have more home time, and you see what I'm saying. But whether done traditionally or otherwise, we are talking essentially a 40-hour work week should be able to support a family. Any of you seeing that right now? Any of you seen that in the last 30 years? I know a few of you have seen it in the last 50 years, because Gen X was the generation where it ceased to be possible. I'm the early part of Gen X. I saw it. My family grew up that way. My mother stayed home with us. Dad went out and made a living. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was not. He was a construction electrician, so the nature of the income was cyclical. But it was doable. By about 1985, it was no longer doable unless you had been doing it so long that your children were about to go away. And we missed it. This isn't just because it's capitalism, it's because of a particularly extreme version of capitalism wherein the corporations have all the power. Not by virtue of their capitalistic contributions, not by virtue of competition, but by virtue of capturing the law. It is a form of protectionism that is just as blatant as the centrally planned economy of communism under Lenin's version. Now, I will again point out that Marx's version was more of an ideal, whereas Lenin tried to put practical implementation of it. It didn't work, and I don't think it could have. And neither can this. Call it corporate capitalism, maybe, or oligarchic capitalism. There needs to be the modifier there. Straight up capitalism is philosophical more than real. Just like communism is not democratic socialism, is not blanket socialism, corporate capitalism is not Nordic capitalism, is not open capitalism, is not, most definitely not, laissez-faire free market capitalism. It is a controlled system. It is not a free market. Now, democratic socialism gives you a more free market because of the social controls. In the ideal that I would pursue on this, you would have a guaranteed or universal basic income. I favor the universal, but the guaranteed is probably where to start. Universal health care like every civilized nation. Yes, America, I just called you uncivilized, and I will keep fucking doing it until we have universal health care. And that's probably enough. Possibly guaranteed housing. We have the money to do it. But sufficient universal basic income or guaranteed basic income would cover that, so we'll leave that out of the equation for now. Doing just those two things would actually benefit laissez-faire capitalism because those at the bottom with ideas to start a business would be able to. Right now, the failure rate of businesses, which is touted often, is around 90%. Is this because everybody that goes into business is a fucking idiot, except for 10% of them? Well, looking at who has succeeded, obviously being a fucking idiot is not the determining factor of failure. What is the determining factor of failure in most cases is they run out of capital. They cannot support their lives, no matter how good their idea is. And you see this in a cynical move that starting in the early aughts, you saw it really commonly, where people would deliberately start up a business that they knew was going to fail because they were going to run out of capital, even though the idea was good, with the express purpose of getting it bought up by one of these mega corporations. They were very open about it. They saw others that were getting bought up and like, hey, that's how my idea will get to market, and I'll make a mint off of it, and I'll become one of these oligarchs. Well, most of them didn't become one of the oligarchs, and the ones that did turned evil, because it just works that way. It is very, very difficult for somebody that has all of the power to not abuse it, even if they don't intend to. This is not exactly new. Lord Acton's dictum, power tends to corrupt. Absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Yes, I quoted it correctly. The way that it's normally said is wrong. Absolute power does not corrupt absolutely. It tends to corrupt absolutely. Some people maintain their morals in spite of having immense power. It's rare, but it happens. But if we make a structure where everyone at the bottom has sufficient power to live, lots of people are going to decide, hey, I'm going to strike out on my own here. I'm going to make things happen. Yes, some will fail, but I'll bet you anything if we got this system in place that the business failure rate would go down to around 50%. Because some people just wouldn't have what it takes, or some would have an idea that the market doesn't buy. That's going to happen. But just a basic, have your basics covered gives you the luxury that the ultra-rich have. Time. The currency that we cannot get back once it's expended, but we can purchase. Under democratic socialism, that's exactly what we're doing. We are purchasing time en masse for the entire population. Some will waste it. This is true. Some will squander it. This is also true. Most will utilize it fairly well. Some will succeed spectacularly. Some will live a mundane life that they enjoy. Some will fall on their face, but because of the social safety nets, they will only fall so far and not become a burden on society. A burden on the checkbook is not necessarily a burden on society. The reason that the right is so adamantly against this to the point where they sabotage anything that goes into it is they know this is true. This is a point that we on the left need to emphasize over and over again. It's like what we are proposing is a form of capitalism with safety nets. And the reason the right opposes it is they know it will succeed. At this point in time, they can't say otherwise. This has been practiced for more than a century in a large part of the world, in countries that are failing horribly like Finland and Denmark and Sweden and Norway and France and Germany. You notice they're not failing spectacularly because of the global downturn mostly caused by America's posturing and the idiot that we've got in charge right now. They're having some problems, and of course the right is exploiting that, but their right wing doesn't deny that humans have basic rights. They just prefer that some people have more special rights, I guess. They're not as bad, for the most part. All right, I'll accept Viktor Orban and the Erdogan character for sure, but for the most part, they are not as bad as our right wing because they already know that they're swimming against the tide. They know that their particular brand of hate has to be carefully moderated because they know that democratic socialism works. They've lived under it. The part that they hope everyone misses is that it requires constant maintenance. Things are going to get out of balance, and it is the job of a democracy to get them back in balance. We have gotten so far out of balance here that neither side can properly do anything about it because they're so busy fighting over the labels. What we need to do is focus on the very basic things. And these are things that the United States knows how to do. We have done it to limited degrees and fashions. We need to focus on universal health care and a living wage or a guaranteed basic income to supplement if we're going to continue to subsidize corporations. And we need to tax appropriately. This is actually not difficult. The difficult part is getting enough people to understand it to the point that they vote for it. The Democratic Party fails at this day after day after day after day. All of my life, the Democratic Party has specialized in snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, we just saw it on the government shutdown thing. People were not going that hungry, and other people were helping them. It was a temporary situation. And the off-year elections demonstrated overwhelmingly that our ideas were getting through. And 8 fucking senators shot us in the back. No, 7. John Fetterman shot from the front. He was in it right from the front. Nevertheless, a betrayal, but at least an honorable one. He did it all along. The rest of them, and the ones who orchestrated it in the background, yeah, Chuck, I'm looking at you. Shot us in the back. What needs to happen next year is every single politician needs to be primaried, and y'all need to consider independence as well. And I would say that a bare minimum test of who you should vote for is 2 things. They are openly in favor of universal health care, and they do not accept money from PACs. Yes, that's going to put them in a disadvantage on the big glitzy screen. There are ways around that. Have a look at Zoran Mamdani. He didn't seem to have too much of a problem with it. And let's face it, the Democrats and the Republicans threw everything they had at him. And I don't mean that in a good way, and yet he won. He showed us how to do it. Bernie has been showing us how to do it a little bit quieter for a long time. You go out and you talk to people. Say, hey, don't you want to be able to go to the doctor without going bankrupt? Oh, and do you think that there should be corporate money in our politics, or do you think that the people should be holding, or rather the politicians should be holding to the people who elected them, not the ones who bought them? That's simple, folks. But you have to actually talk to people. I have lived in red states. I have lived in Idaho for most of my life. Well, about half of my life. I've moved around a lot. But about half of my life I have lived in Idaho, a very red state. Are the people here morons? Some of them. Not most of them. But what do they see when they look at the 2 parties that are supposedly our rulers? They see the Republicans in their face, door to door, canvassing, knocking on doors, talking to them, lying out their asshole butt right there. And they see the Democratic National Convention not even bothering to fund their candidates here, let alone mount any kind of real grassroots campaign. I would bet you that if a Democratic or even independent leftist put in half the effort that Zoran Mamdani did in New York City, that they could take federal office in Idaho, just simply because of our low population. Over a year's period of time, knocking on every door in Idaho is possible. It would require a team, yes. But they'd know your name, and they'd remember your name when they got to the ballot box. Think about it, people. Strategy is everything.